Welcome to the history section. We're starting today at a point of really a fundamental fracture in the early 10th century, a time defined by the near total collapse of central authority in eastern Francia.
Right. And to understand what comes next, the Holy Roman Empire, you first have to grasp the vacuum that it grew out of.
And that vacuum real map of Europe.
It's less of a sudden explosion and more of a structural implosion, a slow motion collapse that really originates from this extreme weakness at the very top.
At the apex of power, exactly. So, Louis the Child. He's the last legitimate Carolingian ruler in the East, and he comes to the throne in 899. But the key detail, of course, is his age.
One's really ruling.
And this creates a power vacuum, a deficit of power at the center that allows for something else to rise up in the regions.
It does. It allows those old tribal territories, the Stemmischer
Stem duchies.
the stem duchies, yes. It allows them to reemerge as these semi-independent states. We're talking about the lands of the old Germanic tribes, the Saxons, the Bavarians, the Swabians.
Places that had been under Frankish administration for centuries, but still had these very strong, local identities.
Right. And the consolidation of these duchies, it isn't just a political choice. It's accelerated by this urgent need for self-preservation.
Because the king isn't providing it.
The king can't provide it. So these territories, they formalize their identities. They become the great duchies: Saxony, Bavaria, Lotharingia, Franconia, Swabia. And they're not really defined by ancient tribal bonds anymore, so much as by the powerful families who rule them, the dukes. These men are raising their own armies and ruling their own lands.
And this internal fragmentation, this devolution of power, it's not happening in a peaceful environment. It's being violently accelerated by an absolutely terrifying external threat.
The Magyars.
The Magyars.
They become a major geopolitical problem almost the second that Arnulf of Carinthia dies. Arnulf had, in a classic late Carolingian move, actually hired them as mercenaries to fight his enemies in Moravia.
A decision he probably came to regret. Or his successors did.
Well, his successors certainly did. Once Arnulf is gone, the Magyars look west. They see the wealth and the obvious vulnerability of eastern Francia, and they turn their attention there.
And the accounts from the time, they all emphasize the sheer speed and really the ferocity of their invasions. They just sweep into eastern Francia.
Their mobility is key. They burn, they destroy, and they have this relentless focus on warfare that just horrifies the more settled Frankish people.
You really have to get into the psychology of it to understand the impact they had. The research gives us this incredible image of their culture, particularly from the chronicler Liutprand of Cremona.
Right. Liutprand gives us this chilling piece of cultural observation. He wrote that for the Magyars, nothing pleases them except to fight.
But it's the next detail that's really astonishing, the one that suggests this martial culture is ingrained from the moment of birth.
He claims their mothers cut their boys' faces with very sharp blades as soon as they come into the world, so that before they may receive the nourishment of milk, they may learn to endure wounds.
It's just a brutal image. And whether it's literally true or, amplified by the terror they inspired.
Doesn't matter, in a way. He tells you how the Franks saw them. This was an existential threat. This wasn't just the season of raiding. It was a sustained assault by a people they believed were literally born into brutality.
And you see the consequences on the ground. By 907, the Kingdom of Moravia, which had been a pretty significant power, is just gone. It has completely disintegrated under these attacks.
Which proves that the existing political structures in the region were completely incapable of resisting this kind of nomadic warfare.
And this constant terrifying pressure is what fundamentally rewires the political landscape of eastern Francia. The king, Louis the Child, is politically and physically unable to provide any kind of central defense.
So that responsibility falls entirely to the local strongmen, to the dukes.
They are forced to take on the defense of their own lands. They raise their own armies, they train them, they pay them.
And this investment, this military and administrative capital, it becomes the justification for their de facto sovereignty. I mean, it's a simple calculation, isn't it? If the king cannot protect you, why should you obey him?
Exactly. They're fighting their own battles, ruling their own lands, and paying less and less attention to a distant, powerless royal court. The whole Carolingian model of centralized authority is just obsolete. It's superseded by the necessity of local defense.
And that failure, that complete inability of the crown to perform its most basic function, sets the stage for one last really dramatic attempt to salvage the whole Carolingian project.
Louis the Child, now about 18 years old, he must have realized his kingship was a hollow shell. So in 910, he does the only thing he can do. He tries to assert his power through military victory.
It's a gamble, really. a bid to solve two problems at once. First, defeat the Magyars and remove the external threat.
Which would remove the justification for the Duke's independence.
Precisely. And second, he wanted to use that victory to reassert his own authority over those same dukes, to remind them that they were his vassals, not his equals.
So to do this, he gathers what's supposed to be a great army at Augsburg. It's a composite force, his own royal soldiers, plus the armies brought by all the great noblemen.
But the Battle of Augsburg is an absolute, unmitigated disaster.
The Magyars, who are masters of surprise and mobility, they attack before dawn. They catch the Frankish army completely unprepared.
Many of them are still in their beds, in their encampments. The fighting that followed was just horrific. The sources paint this picture of hours of relentless slaughter.
We have these very specific descriptions, that the fields were, quote, completely littered with corpses, and river and banks turned red by the blood that mixed in. This wasn't a skirmish, it was a wholesale slaughter.
And it revealed the fundamental weakness of the Frankish military system.
Mm-hmm.
But the real lesson of Augsburg was a tactical one.
The feigned retreat.
The feigned retreat. The Magyars would pretend to be routed, and the heavy Frankish cavalry, eager for a victory, would break their disciplined ranks and charge after them.
A classic mistake. As soon as the Frankish pursuit becomes disordered, scattered.
The Magyars, who were incredible horse archers, just wheel around. They double back and attack the flanks and the rear of the now disorganized Frankish army. They just shatter them.
The army scatters. The royal bid for centralization fails utterly.
And the defeat is so absolute that Louis, completely broken, retreats to a monastery. He dies less than a year later in 911.
So the failure at Augsburg becomes this definitive turning point. It's the final proof that the Carolingian crown cannot protect the realm.
Which immediately confirms the autonomy of the dukes. So when Louis dies, from the perspective of Western Francia, the logical next step is reunification.
Of course. Charles the Simple, the Carolingian king in the West, he immediately claims the dynastic right to rule the East as well. And on paper, his argument is sound.
It is. The old Frankish Empire should be reunited under the one remaining Carolingian banner. But that logic runs directly counter to the new reality on the ground.
The dukes in the East, having spent a generation defending their own lands, raising their own armies, they were completely unwilling to surrender that power to another distant Carolingian king.
They feared that a strong central monarch would just erode the autonomy they had bought with their own blood.
So their response is something truly radical for the time. They reject the idea of dynastic succession entirely.
Instead of accepting Charles the Simple, they do something new. They elect one of their own. Conrad, the Duke of Franconia, becomes their king.
And the intention here was to create a totally new kind of government. The research suggests that the dukes saw this as a king who would be a primus inter pares.
A leader among equals, yes. Acknowledging the inherent power of the other dukes. Henry of Saxony, Arnulf of Bavaria. It was supposed to be a consensus government, a horizontal power structure.
But they fundamentally misread their man.
Completely. Conrad, as soon as he is elected, he immediately reverts to the old, centralized Carolingian style of monarchy he was supposed to replace.
Liedprand of Cremona again gives us that perfect symbolic detail. He observes that Conrad's crown was, quote, not just decorated, but burdened with most precious gems.
And that's not just about wealth. The burden is the weight of ambition. He immediately starts insisting that the other dukes acknowledge his superiority, follow his commands.
Which leads to a constitutional crisis. It leads to 7 years of civil war.
Pretty much. The other dukes, especially Henry of Saxony and Arnulf of Bavaria, they refused to submit. They saw it as a betrayal of the agreement that got him elected. So Conrad spends his entire reign, from 911 to 918, just fighting his own powerful nobles, and failing.
His attempt to force a centralized model onto this new reality it breaks against the resolve of the duchies.
It's another failure. Louis the Child's military failure is mirrored by Conrad's political failure. Both were attempts to resurrect an old system that just didn't work anymore.
So when Conrad dies in 918, the dukes gather again. They realize the idea of a king wasn't the problem, it was the type of king they chose.
They needed to try the new model again, but this time with a man who actually understood and respected the power of the duchies, because he was one of them.
Which brings us to the pivotal figure in all of this, Henry, the Duke of Saxony.
Henry the Fowler. He's elected in 918, he's in his early 40s. His nickname, of course, just comes from his love of bird hunting. a rather mundane hobby for the man who would found a kingdom.
But his background is what's absolutely crucial here. He's a Saxon, not a Franconian like Conrad. Saxony was the most fiercely independent of the duchies.
And he had personally led the resistance against Conrad's centralizing policies. He understood the ducal perspective because it was his own.
So he was the perfect candidate for a new kind of rule, one based on negotiation, not command.
Right. He wasn't a powerless boy king like Louis, and he wasn't an over-ambitious centralizer like Conrad. He understood that unity had to be earned. It couldn't be forced.
And the model of kingship he creates is just a radical departure from centuries of tradition. He spends his first 3 years not fighting his peers, but negotiating with them.
He establishes this series of oaths of vassalage. But we have to be clear, this isn't the traditional feudal relationship. This is a political arrangement between near equals.
It's a two-way street.
It is. The oaths acknowledge mutual responsibilities. The king owes the dukes respect for their autonomy, and the dukes, in return, owe the king military support for collective defense.
He essentially trades the ideal of absolute central control for a political coalition. He recognizes the dukes as senior partners in governing.
And they are given the authority to run their own lands, their own laws, their own courts, without royal interference.
And this is the paradox of Henry's rule, isn't it? By giving up the desire for absolute control, he actually gains their willing cooperation.
Exactly. Because their independence is secure, they no longer fear that cooperating with the king will diminish their own power. So when he calls on them, they come.
So, with the internal politics settled, he turns his attention outward. He starts to consolidate the kingdom's borders. And he takes advantage of the chaos that's still happening in Western Francia.
The West is still in turmoil. Charles the Simple made that politically disastrous decision to grant Normandy to the Viking chieftain Rollo, which infuriated his own nobles.
And Henry seizes that moment of weakness. By 925, he controls a solid territorial core, the 5 major duchies, Franconia, Saxony, Bavaria, Swabia, and Lorraine.
And critically, he also secures Aachen, Charlemagne's old capital. This is symbolically huge. It gives his new kingdom a connection to Carolingian legitimacy, even as he's rejecting their political system.
And this is where we see the identity of the realm really start to shift. Henry makes no effort to be just another Frankish king. The kingdom stops being called Eastern Francia.
The identity is no longer universal and Frankish. It's now derived from these powerful regional blocks with their old Germanic names. This is the moment a kingdom of Germany really begins to take shape.
A kingdom defined by its regions, united by consensus.
And that willingness of the dukes to cooperate, born from his open-handed rule, gives Henry the military strength he needs to finally deal with the eastern frontier.
The Magyar threat, which hasn't gone away.
Not at all. And in 933, the issue comes to a head. Henry has spent years building up defenses, fortified towns, the burgs, and training a disciplined cavalry force. He's ready for a decisive confrontation.
And he knows he can't repeat the mistakes made at Augsburg 23 years earlier.
So he summons the forces of all the duchies. Saxons, Bavarians, Franconians, they all come. And the armies meet at the Battle of Riade, near the fortress of Merseburg.
And the battle plan shows how much Henry had learned. His strategy is designed specifically to counter the Magyar tactics that destroyed the Franks before.
We have his actual instructions to his troops, which is extraordinary. He is laser-focused on discipline. He knows the two things that doomed the army at Augsburg were the mounted archery and the feigned retreat.
So what were his orders?
He commanded, and this is direct quote, "Let no one try to advance beyond his comrades, though he has a faster horse. Instead, take the first strike of their arrows on your shields. Then rush on them with the fastest charge and with the most vehement attack in such a way that they cannot fire a second volley of arrows on you before they feel the cuts of your weapons upon them."
It's a brilliant piece of tactical instruction. Let no one advance beyond his comrades. That solves the discipline problem. It prevents the line from breaking.
Right. Take the first strike of their arrows on your shields. That neutralizes the initial archery attack. It makes it harmless.
And then the final part, the fast, unified charge. That's the killer blow.
It denies the Magyars the time and space they need for their strategy. They can't reload, they can't maneuver, and they certainly can't execute a feigned retreat because they're being overwhelmed.
And Liutprand of Cremona confirms that it worked perfectly.
He does. He writes that the Saxons, quote, "charged with an orderly, even line, and there was no one who outran the slower with a faster horse, and they took on their shields the harmless strikes of the Magyars' arrows. Only then did they surmount the enemy with a vigorous charge."
The result was a decisive victory. The Magyar advance was broken. They retreat east, Henry had achieved through coordination what Louis couldn't achieve through a claim to absolute power.
Exactly. But military victory is one thing, long-term security is another. Henry's grand strategy required creating a permanent buffer zone on his eastern flank.
Which brings us to the very complicated and ultimately tragic story of Bohemia.
Henry's plan was to turn the small dukedom of Bohemia into a reliable vassal state, a buffer against any future incursions.
And Bohemia's own history was, ironically, shaped by that same Magyar threat. Its first real duke, a man named Spetinev, was actually a Moravian noble who had moved west specifically to escape the Magyar raids.
And crucially, he was a Christian. His father had been baptized by Methodius, the famous Byzantine missionary, and he solidified his rule in Bohemia with help from East Frankish soldiers. So from its very beginning, the Bohemian state had this connection to the West and to Christianity.
A connection that becomes the central point of conflict when the succession falls to Spatinev's grandson, Wenceslaus.
Wenceslaus inherits the title when he's only about 14. So the real power lies with two women who represent two opposing futures for Bohemia.
On one side, his grandmother, Ludmila, a devout Christian who wants to raise Wenceslaus as a Christian king, fully aligned with the German kingdom.
And on the other side, his own mother, Dromir, a young, ambitious woman who clings to the old Slavic pagan religions and sees Christianity as a foreign influence.
This is a battle for the soul of the country.
It is, and Dromir decides to win it through violence. She sends her palace guards to strangle her mother-in-law, Ludmila, in her own chapel. She removes the Christian influence and takes sole control as regent.
But her plan to de-Christianize her son fails.
It does. Wenceslaus refuses to abandon the faith his grandmother taught him. As soon as he turns 18, around 925, he seizes power. He exiles his mother, Drahomira, and takes control.
And his first move is to embrace the alliance with Henry the Fowler.
Enthusiastically. He sees the strategic stability Henry offers. He agrees to position Bohemia as Henry's Christian vassal state, that crucial buffer.
But this pro-German, pro-Christian policy was deeply unpopular with a faction of the Bohemian nobility.
Deeply. They saw Henry as a threat to their independence. And for them, Christianity wasn't a matter of faith. It was a political tool of domination that would make Bohemia vulnerable to a German takeover.
And this resistance forms around Wenceslaus's younger brother, Boleslav.
Yes, Boleslav's faction demanded that Wenceslaus break the alliance and renounce Christianity. They believed this was the only way to ensure a strong, autonomous Bohemia free from German influence.
Wenceslaus refused.
He refused, and that refusal cost him his life. In 935, Boleslav and his co-conspirators met Wenceslaus at the church door early in the morning as he was going to Mass, and they stabbed him to death.
Boleslav immediately declared himself prince. It was a political execution, a violent, bloody declaration of Bohemian independence.
Absolutely. It was an explicit rejection of Henry's entire geopolitical strategy for the region.
But even though the motives were clearly political, Wenceslaus was immediately hailed across Christendom as a martyr for the faith.
His death at the door of a church transformed him into a powerful religious symbol, just like his grandmother Ludmila before him.
And legends began to grow around him almost immediately. We know that the 14th century emperor Charles IV was so fascinated by him that he personally collected these stories.
He did. And there's one anecdote from Charles IV's manuscript that really captures his legacy. It's the story of Wenceslaus walking through a blizzard with a soldier who fears he's going to freeze to death.
And Wenceslaus tells him, "Place your feet in the prints left by mine."
Exactly. The soldier does, and he instantly feels warm. But then the story adds this incredibly poignant detail. It says that stains of blood could clearly be seen in the prints the glorious martyr left.
It's his perfect image, blending the miracle with the sacrifice.
It is. It cemented his image as a saint who suffered for his commitment to the Christian West.
Now, the assassination of his key ally on the eastern frontier should have prompted a massive response from Henry.
It should have, but Henry never retaliated. By 935, the king had grown very ill. His focus had shifted from geopolitics to the question of his own succession.
He died in 936, just a year after Wenceslaus was murdered. And his final act as king was maybe his most important.
Absolutely. In a complete and deliberate break from Frankish tradition, the tradition of dividing the kingdom among your sons, which had ruined the Carolingians, Henry did the opposite. He excluded all but one of his sons from the inheritance.
He left the kingdom whole.
He left the German kingdom whole and undivided to his son Otto. And that decision guaranteed the future of the state he had built. It ensured that his consensual political settlement would become a continuous, powerful dynasty.
Considering the foundational relationships established by Henry, you see a dynamic where shared external threat and internal power decentralization gave rise to a kingdom defined by negotiation rather than mere dynastic decree. This raises an important question regarding the efficacy of consensus rule versus centralized military dominance in establishing long-term state stability.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed learning something new. That's all for now, but in case you didn't notice, there are a lot more episodes on this subject available right now. If you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs.